Kirsty, please do drop them in the chat privately to Kate or myself, and I will do our best to bring those into a quick Q&A session at the end of this. I'm sure we'll also distribute contact details as well if anyone wants to come back. So Kirsty, over to you.
Hello, and thank you very much for the invite to come in to talk to you. Yes, I work for Cruse Bereavement Care. We are the UK's leading bereavement support charity, and I imagine a lot of you probably never heard of us before today. You're not alone. We've been quietly doing our thing, supporting bereaved people for about 60 years. We had our 60th anniversary last year. But we're the sort of charity that quietly does our thing, and people don't know about us until they need us. Unfortunately, that is increasingly at the moment. Bereavement, grief is what we do, what we support, and it is an enormous topic. I'm not going to be able to do justice in 15 minutes or even 10 to 15 minutes on what you might all want to know. We can give you some heads up and some tasters and some things to think about. Just about me, I've been in the role for nearly 3 years, and we train a whole range of organisations. It was all face-to-face until very recently, where we've had to do a very quick run around, and we're now very familiar with Zoom. But in my former life, up to the last crisis, the financial crisis, I worked as a loan development manager for one of the big law firms. So I know a little bit, albeit quite a few years ago, about the context in which all of you work in the city. So that's me for background. So if I can just move to the first slide. Can I do that? Thank you. I was asked to give some stats and some background on what the size and scale of what's going on. We are all seeing those death figures from COVID-19 ticking up every day, and it was 26, nearly 27,000 when I put the slides together. At Cruse, we've done some research, and we estimate that on average 6 people are severely impacted when somebody dies, particularly with COVID-19, it being a very sudden and unexpected death. And those people may not always be the people you suspect. Grief depends on your relationship with the individual that dies. And I am going to be very much using the phrase death, dead and dying. I hope you don't find that offensive, but we really clearly say that you have to use clear language around this subject. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So if you do double up the numbers, work it all out, that's 160,000 people more now who've been impacted by losing someone through coronavirus. We did some more research, and on an average of 50 people attending a funeral, as we know, some funerals will be an awful lot bigger than that, will be much smaller. Given that we now can have only a handful of people attending a funeral, that means over a million, nearly 1.5 million people won't be able to attend a funeral that they would have done in the way they would have done, or have a funeral in the way they would have wanted to mark and commemorate the life of a person in the way they would have normally. All very understandable, but that's the ripple effect that we're going to be seeing. This is only part of the story, and this is the bit I really am championing actually. COVID-19 has been awful, a real tragedy, and a lot of people have died. But every month, 50,000 people die from cancer, from pneumonia, from all sorts of stuff like heart attacks. All of that is still actually going on. And COVID-19 is taking the limelight in terms of the stats and the press, but 50,000 other families are also being impacted. And they're also being impacted in the funerals and all of this stuff. So actually at this moment, millions of people and their grief and the bereavement journey is being affected by what we're all having to do to fight the virus with social isolation and social distancing. Sorry. Next slide. Next slide, please. So that's the background. I don't know what any of you know about grief, but if you take away one thing from this today, I'd like you to take away the fact that everybody's grief is different. It's different even for yourself with different people who die, because it depends on so many factors. We all want grief to be straightforward, a nice linear journey from A to B. It isn't like that. And if any of you have lost somebody very close to you, you're probably nodding along, hopefully, to what I've been saying. It goes here, it goes there, it goes round and about into dead ends. It jumps, it curves, it swells. It's very much like the squiggle in the diagram. But grief isn't an illness. It isn't a mental health condition or issue. Sorry if I use long term. It can obviously lead to other complications, but grief in itself is an emotional response. It's an emotional response to having loved and been and valued an individual. It's actually part of a healing process. It's horrible. It's not fun. It's challenging. It's mind-boggling. It's all over the place. It's a turmoil, but it is actually a natural process. If grief runs without complications, people will not get over it. We're not saying that at all, but they will adjust to a new version of the world, a new normal. Phrase we're all hearing so much, but a new normal that doesn't have that person in it, but has a remembrance and links to them. One thing that's really important there isn't a hierarchy to grief, and we're hearing this already in calls we're having and in the webinars that we're delivering. That point about people who are dying from heart attack, cancer, the normal stuff, they're already starting to feel and voice that they're not feeling like they're important, or that their loss or their grief or their bereavement is as important as the COVID-19 death. That isn't true. It's as important for them. Everybody who loses a loved one, it's important. And I think my message again for you is just to be aware of all of those others. And this is stuff that people may voice to you when they come for support. And finally, another thing we're hearing is social isolation, all that's going on, and we're hearing this on our helpline, is triggering people, triggering old grief to come back and jump out and surprise people who thought perhaps they were fairly all right with the fact that their mum died X many years ago. This strange time, this pause for reflection, this being so isolated is stirring things up again. So grief is always there. There's no timeline. We get calls on our national helpline from people whose brothers and sisters died 20, 30, 50 years ago. There is right, they have as much right to express their grief and look for support as anybody else. So come the next slide, please. Thank you. These are things we've heard, we at Cruse regularly hear through callers, people that we support in any face-to-face support when we're able to do it, say, and things like, imagine they would come to you as mental health first aiders and saying, I feel out of control, my emotions are all over the place. I'm okay 1 minute and then I'm in tears. Probably some of you may recognise that feeling. And then some of you might say, but I don't feel anything. I feel numb. I should feel upset, and I don't. I'm worried, I'm going mad. Very common for people who are bereaved is to have impact on their eating and sleeping patterns, insomnia, their ability to process information. And then the one for the people who think, I ought to be over this, I should feel better. There's no limits, there's no oughts and shoulds with grief. Grief will come and go, and for some people, you may come to you because it's an important date. It's an anniversary, it's a birthday, and things like that. Or something has just happened in their life that's thrown them back into that grief from the early days, and they're feeling they need some support. And I can imagine they need to come to you to hear that. But hopefully, these are phrases that as mental health first aiders, you've probably got the skills and the experience and the compassion and the empathy to actually work with and offer the support that's needed. Hopefully it shouldn't be too worrying from your point of view. Next slide, please. So what helps? Let's be honest, you can't fix the big thing. The one thing that would really help is that loved one is able, is back, is there. Life hadn't changed in the way it did when it did. We can't do that. We can't turn back. However, what people are tending to look for when they're seeking support after bereavement is they want to be listened to, heard, and acknowledged. Again, as mental health first aiders, you're all going to be great at that. You're going to be great as somebody to talk to who's not person involved in the situation. Having that time to sit and listen to what they want to say, the stories, to talk about the person, possibly often to talk about how they died. People do feel the need to revisit that. Oh, not that. Oh, we've gone backwards. Revisit actually how a person died. There may be much more talking about the funeral they would have liked to have had and weren't able to have. Quiet listening and sitting alongside somebody is often the best support and actually what they need. People also, we really find it helpful to have their thoughts and feelings normalised. We talk about this a lot at Cruse, normalising grief, explaining to people that it's very common to think you've seen somebody in a crowd. It's very common to struggle perhaps to process it all. It's common to be fine 1 minute and then something happens and you're a puddle of tears the next. These are all normal responses to grief, and we've got a lot more about this on our website should you want to just read a few bits and pieces, and very much definitely a section about COVID-19. But these are normal. So that reassurance about that's fine, it's fine to feel like that, it's okay to not be okay. And again, you're all very, very familiar with those sorts of conversation, I know. But also this is a massive change in people's lives. So being able to sit there and understand how, because of this bereavement, other stuff has been impacted and help them to think about that is again really valuable, really helps support people. And some it's very practical things, childcare arrangements. If you've lost your partner and you're a parent, you've gone from being a 2-parent family to a single parent family, that is a massive adjustment. That is obviously going to be a massive emotional challenge and practical challenge landing at the same time. So being able to support even on some of the more practical stuff and offer ideas, again, very, very valuable. Next slide, please. So a few golden rules, people like a few top tips. First one, it is never about you. If you're talking to a bereaved person, however helpful you might think you're being by saying, oh, I remember when, and I know that when my whoever died, the bereaved person, it isn't helpful for them. That's your experience. They need to talk about what's going on for them. So please, as much as you think it's helpful, we hear time and time again that those comments just aren't. So please focus on the person that you're with. Number 2, as I said earlier, you can't make this better. None of us can. However wonderful, nobody can make this better. But try not to minimise things. Be at least she isn't suffering. At least. It really, again, is something we hear. People think they're being kind and being helpful, but it doesn't work and it doesn't help. Religion. Everybody has different beliefs, belief systems. You may not know. You may know a lot about the person who's watching, you may not. We also find that sometimes when somebody dies, people turn to religion where they hadn't before, or the opposite way. We just advise try not to go down that road just for your own falling into potential hot issues or straying into areas that you're not comfortable with dealing with. I think I've touched on rule 4, which is it's okay to be okay. It's okay to feel what they're feeling. They're entitled to feel what they're feeling. It's normal, it's right, and it's their bereavement and their emotions. And last thing is anything, just doing something, some small steps, some small suggestions. I think for a lot of the people for now, that will be things like, have you got friends, family that you can talk to or you've been talking to about this? I think for now, because people can't connect in the way they would have done, encouraging people to talk and reach out is a good first step. Cruse obviously has our national helpline. The numbers are on our website. Sadly, we don't have the funding to be managed 24 hours a day and at the weekends, but it's there. There's also a lot of information people might want to read, because it might be they want to come back and read something and go, yeah, I get that now. For me, I understand why that's like that for me. And again, there's a lot of information on our website. and downloadable leaflets under the publications. We have a Facebook page. Again, people might think that that's a useful source to join on to that. There are also, though, other charities, other organisations that support. We are great, I would say that, but there are other organisations. There are ones specifically for things like bereavement from a child death, miscarriage, drug-related deaths. There's a whole load, and there's a lot of support organisations out there. I think we have some of them on our website. It's certainly, there are other people to signpost, so you may well have those resources already at your fingertips, or you might want to go and just have a quick ferret around. Some local areas, some local boroughs will have their own bereavement support areas, I know, in different parts of London. So there are some local groups and local support, as well as us as a national charity. I also should say, if any of you have links to colleagues working in Scotland, we have a sister charity that works in Scotland called British Bereavement Care Scotland. Strange that. And I think I'm okay for time. Last slide, if that's okay. So, golden rules. Everyone's grief is different. Everybody's experience of a different death can be different. There isn't a solution that sorts everything. There's no magic solution. Grief does take time. People will go process things at a different rate. But if you use your active listening, that you'll all be very familiar with, if you can help understand the situation, be appropriate in your communication, so clear, plain language, use the person who died's name if the person is supporting uses it back, mirroring their language, again, skills you'll all be incredibly familiar with, you'll be going very much in the right direction. And please never, ever, ever say that somebody had a good innings. Please stay away with the cliches. And if I can campaign to get rid of that phrase from people's languages when there's 43 people, I will feel very pleased. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. Fantastic. And I know I'll be saying the same about Fiona, and it's so often the way with these webinars as well that you'd love to be able to continue this conversation for much longer, but I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your time. I know that you need to leave us, but I've got one question if that's okay. I know some others have been coming in at the chat, but hopefully we can use follow-up CMHA sessions to bring those through as well. You know, the point that you say at the end there about had a good innings, or other phrases that come out, and quite often within the world of those that are mental health first aiders or mental health ambassadors or champions within their workplaces on this webinar will have had discussions and conversations about language, about different use of language and the impact that has on an individual as well, but also about how sometimes when we're feeling worried or stressed or out of our comfort zone, we sometimes come back with phrases that in hindsight we didn't think were that helpful. So something like maybe they'd had a good innings or something like that. So would you be saying that particularly at this time of clear stress and worry and sadness for someone, that actually if we do find ourselves making a mistake in terms of our approach to them or the language that we use, what would your advice be to someone there to back away or to still stay engaged?
Stay engaged. If you find yourself straying and say, put your foot in it, just stop, pause, and start again. Generally, people won't be that offended in the moment. It's always better to say something than say nothing. So often you hear the people who emotionally or physically cross the road to avoid a bereaved person. So being there, and even if you put, you know, the fact it's well meant and the meaning behind it is positive and supportive, people are generally, you know, going to be okay. I also would say if people are bursting into tears on you, it's nothing necessarily, it's probably not what you said or done. It's the situation. It's all of what's going on. It's not you as an individual. It might be that they've been holding on, and the fact that you're just being very kind and warm allows that to come out. So yeah, we all put our foot in it from time to time. As long as the intent is good, just check yourself and start again.
Great, thank you. That's a really good reminder, and I think, you know, particularly as we were saying, those who put themselves in these situations, ambassadors, workplace champions, mental health first aiders, or, you know, good supported colleagues essentially, will often want to be doing a lot. And I think it's a really good reminder and a reassurance as well that actually key skills like noticing, listening, asking questions, and being human to it as well. So not thinking we need a specialist set of skills, but actually these are just good human interactive relationship skills, aren't they?
Yeah. Being human is the main thing. Empathy rather than sympathy. But I would say if somebody's still coming back and looking for that support and that sort of, you know, after perhaps 6 months, or you feel they're getting stuck, and you'll sense that you're going around the same sort of loops, and you feel that things are not progressing, however slowly, that's when they may be heading into something called complicated grief. That is a known thing. The situations all around COVID-19 are stacking up for us to see a lot of that. It's at that point to signpost off to more suitable support, whether that's EAPs that you have in your organisation, whether that is Cruse, whether that's another local bereavement support organisation. You know, that will be, you'll make a judgment at the time. But yes, if you sense people are literally feeling like they're stuck, take note, and that's when to reach out and refer.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, so I should say, you can't refer to Cruse. People have to contact us and self-refer. But to signpost was the word I should have said. Signpost.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you. And I think, again, a reminder that on the Cruse website, and as you were saying, there's lots of other organisations out there that maybe are working in more specialist areas of individuals experiencing bereavement and loss, as you were saying, death and dying, then actually they're great places for resource and further information for us as individuals to feel more confident, and for those of us who are unfortunately going through this experience.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned grief and loss, because actually, not that I'm plugging the training, but we do cover, bereavement is the biggest loss, but actually a lot of the stuff we talk about when we do the training covers other losses, of which, you know, again, those all have their impact on people. So yeah, we touch on that when we do get to training time.
Great, thank you again, and thank you as well for fitting in and being part of today with us all, as I know you're very busy. Kirsty, I'm sure, can be found on through Cruse Bereavement and through various other social media channels and LinkedIn and various things. So if anyone does have a specific question following on from this, then please do connect with Kirsty, and we'll also have the opportunity, CMHA will be sending out resources as well as that evaluation that Alison mentioned at the end. Yes, Kirsty.
Can I just say, please, if you are to contact, could you email training@cruse.org.uk? It's the one you'll see on the training pages. That way, it may be a few of us can respond, and you might get a quicker response.
Certainly, thank you very much. Okay, so just a quick reminder of what Lubna took us through as well. So not that I have her skills and experience, but I'm just reminding myself here more than anyone to readjust my posture, to remember my shoulders. I think I've just done 20 minutes without actually rolling my shoulders, put feet on the floor, and just bringing our breathing back as well. So a good reminder of that. If anyone's not on mute, could I just ask them to put themselves on mute? Thank you. Seems to be a bit of background noise there. Okay, so our next speaker, Fiona Llewellyn from the Women's Trust, who is here to share her experience and knowledge around the work that they do, and also on supporting someone, a colleague of ours, who is experiencing domestic violence. So the next 15 minutes over to Fiona. Again, if you have any questions, please do drop them to myself or Kate, and we will do our best to weave those in and to do a quick Q&A session with Fiona at the end. Fiona, my pleasure. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Fiona Llewellyn. I'm the Therapeutic Services Manager at Women's Trust. We're a specialist domestic abuse mental health service. If we can go to the next slide, and then that'll be great. So we were set up in 1996 by a group of survivors and some counsellors to address a gap in service provision, as there's no specialist mental health support. And we've been running our services since then. We offer free counselling support groups and workshops to women who've experienced domestic abuse. We run across 3 West London and 8 East London boroughs, just to say for our counselling, and for our support groups and workshops are pan-London only. Currently, we're running support groups and counselling via telephone or Zoom sessions, and our workshops are on hold. So we are delivering a service. Had a bit of a rapid learning because it's not the way we've gone down before, but that's sort of where we're working. Yeah, so that, if we go to the next slide, I can just say a little bit more. So I just thought it'd be really useful just to include what we mean by, and we use the word domestic abuse rather than domestic violence, because subject around domestic abuse is more than just physical violence, and that often gets lost, particularly when you see lots of things that are in the media or discussions around this, because it will often linked into calling police, taking people to court, but there are a lot of behaviours that fall under domestic abuse that aren't kind of legislated around. So the new kind of cross-government definition is about any kind of, and it's an incident or series of patterns of controlling behaviours that are threatening or abusive from anyone who's 16 years over. And it could be intimate partners, it can be family members, it can be older sons against a father or mother, it could be mother-in-laws, it could be a whole family unit against one particular person. And this can happen regardless of gender or sexuality. Just want to include what it can we include under abuse. So sort of psychological can be what we call kind of putting somebody down, kind of being very dismissive of their opinions, like criticising what they wear, how they do things, anything that kind of erodes that's a person's sort of self-confidence and self-belief. Physical, fairly self-explanatory, but that can be anything from throwing something at somebody to strangling them, attacking them with a knife. We've had clients who've been threatened with guns. It can be all levels of the spectrum around physical violence. Sexual violence, that can be everything from rape, which happens a lot and will actually, I think, come up a lot more in this lockdown situation, where people are very much more isolated, to withholding things like, what do I want to use the word? My hand's got that. You know, withholding things like contraception, or actually kind of deciding forcing that person perhaps into having an abortion. Financial abuse is something that we see increasingly nowadays, and it's everything from forcing that person to take out loans and then they're left with the debt, forcing them to be the main breadwinner, and handing over the money to the other person, actually controlling the money, where the person might have a really, really good salary, but actually has no access to that money because the other person gets them to hand it over, or it gives them a very tiny amount of money and they have to account for every single penny and what they've spent it on. Emotional abuse, again, that's kind of the name calling them stupid, putting them down, kind of things. Coercive control, which you might not know, it's about controlling that person, so manipulating them, having a say about where they go, who they see, who they talk to, how they spend their time. It can be literally things on timing, how long it takes them to go to the shops to buy something and come back, and then why did it take you longer than the 10 minutes? What else were you doing? Who did you speak to? What did you do? So it's really kind of, and then the one that's increasingly and more so actually during this kind of lockdown period is around technological abuse, which can be anything from stalking on social media, hacking into emails so they can see who people are talking to, looking at their web browser history to what they've been looking up. It can be things like what we call like revenge pornography. You know, I've sent these pictures to your workplace. These are all things that people have threatened to do. And using things like, probably not so much at the moment, sort of what we call modern technology about, you know, where you can see who's called at the house, so they can see who's called at the home when they're not there, finding out what's happened, they've asked things they might have asked Siri, or all those kind of things. So it's kind of, technology abuse is an area that's growing and thriving as technology is more and more used to actually sort of abuse the person. I've got here at the end, it also includes things like stalking, because actually that can be part of it, even if a person has what we call a non-molestation order against the person, that they can't come within a certain area. They might kind of just touch on, so they're just outside the area, but enough that the person knows they're around. Sexual harassment, forced marriage falls under this, FGM and honour crime, which is that happens in particularly some ethnic minority groups. Well, someone say, well, if you don't marry this person or do these things, then you've brought dishonour on the family. So it's quite a wide remit. So that kind of gives you a sense of what kind of behaviours we're talking about. And fundamentally, it's about the other person wanting to control what the other person does and how they behave, and wanting them to do what they want them to do rather than them having a choice in what happens. Okay. So I just want to put it into some kind of context, because it's been up in the agenda a lot, but this is kind of statistics from the normal world, how we were before, that it affects 1 in 4 women. We acknowledge actually anyone can experience domestic abuse, either in men, same-sex relationships, but it is predominantly something that is done by men to women, hence 82% of abuse is against women. So it is predominantly a gender crime. Over 42% have mental health problems, and 17% have planned or attempted suicide, and 2 women have killed every week by former partner or a current partner. And in the current closed down situation, those murder statistics have already doubled. I think that was up to the end of April. Cost of society is estimated around 66 billion. And you think about 1 in 6 incidents are reported to police every minute. And these are known statistics, and we all know that it's really underreported because a lot of people don't disclose and don't tap into agencies. They manage the situation as best they can by themselves. And I've put in one here, 61% suffer PTSD. PTSD is something we often think of particularly around military personnel, and the person who first started some of the counselling theory, shall I say, around domestic abuse referred to this as war in the home. So the same things that happen and the same experiences somebody has in domestic violence can be very similar to what happens around mental health and domestic abuse. Okay, do you want to go to the next slide? So just kind of saying how we are with the current situation. I could say a lot more about domestic abuse and its behaviours and how it comes out. But part of what's happening now is a key part of domestic abuse often is isolating the person from their friends and family, so they control who they have access to, and often limit it away so they feel there is nobody apart from the abusive partner. Now, what we have in this current situation is actually that isolation is sort of being given power by the authorities for the person to continue to do this, and actually that will then also impact about how they kind of can also reach out to friends and family. So if that person is controlling their use of phone or being able to do things like Zoom, whatever, then they will feel even more isolated. One other thing we notice that actually additional levels of stress anxiety because the perpetrator knows where the person is 24/7, because they're both often in the same home together, or they know even if they're separated, they're at home, whatever. And that is adding to people's anxieties, so, because it feels that sense of I don't know what they might do is happening. We know calls to the National Domestic Violence Helpline and also to Respect, which is around people who are concerned about behaviours, have increased rapidly. These stats are probably up to the end of April. A lot of people are contacting them. How they're contacting them is slightly different from how they were historically. There's a lot more what people wanting to use online chat rather than web phone calls, because that's it feels safer than actually having a phone call. Ways that people might have used to reach out for support have closed down. So people might have been able to make a phone call when they were taking the children to school, on the way to work, in a lunch hour. Those don't exist anymore for most people. So the space to actually reach out to help is really less than it was before. And there could be a thing just to flag up, even if somebody has come out of an abusive relationship many, many years ago, the current situation could also be triggering those past experiences of feeling isolated, anxious, not in control of their own lives, not being able to do what they want to do, and that is coming up. And if for some perpetrators a reason to restart the abuse, so they might not have done anything for a while, but actually start sending abusive emails or text messages. And in some cases, often the current situation of everybody kind of being limited where they can go is actually cause another form of abuse. So we've clients who have older children who live with them, and the client has sort of health conditions that make them vulnerable, and part of the abuse phase is the person going out a lot more, increasing the risk of bringing the virus in the home, which is actually causing them a lot of distress. Okay, if you want to go to the next slide. So just thinking about how that impacts, the domestic abuse might impact on somebody's well-being. These are the kind of things that we find frequently in the people we see. So it's a whole remit of feelings, behaviours and ability to function. What we are noticing perhaps more at the moment is a sense of hopelessness and helplessness, because things that were kind of moving forward, such as court cases or child access cases around family law, or even things like divorce, are all put on hold. So people are feeling actually this situation is never going to end, it's never going to be resolved. So there's a higher increased levels of anxiety. You know, everybody's feeling anxious, but people who are experiencing this are even more anxious. There is a great sense of increased sense of what's the point of it all. So increase the feeling like perhaps it's more suicidal, and in some cases that might be they don't actually want to, but they might just say, I've taken an extra, you know, double the quantity of paracetamol they should have because I'm just feeling so desperate. It's an indicator of their well-being, how they are. And just feeling terribly alone with it all, and not having anyone they can reach out to. And a bit in here is, you know, most people experience at least 35 incidents, and by the incidents we usually mean physical incidents. We're not recording emotional, psychological before they seek support. And the average, you know, people are in their relationship for about 3 years, but some people can be in their 20, 40 years managing that situation, usually by themselves. They're not telling many people because actually they kind of feel too ashamed or too embarrassed. And in all of this as well is actually the person is trying to manage the situation as best they can. They will know the triggers and be looking out for what might set off the abuse in the other person. They will be kind of managing the situation as best they can to minimise the impact on children if they're living at home with them. And there is there can be a kind of sense of certainly in the time as well, is not wanting to flag it up much about what's happening at home, because I need to minimise it to cope with the situation, because what can anybody or I or anybody do at this precise moment in time? So it's important to say everyone will be in a very different place depending on their own experiences. Everyone will respond differently. Why we have some of these things about the impact is because we want to kind of, when you're speaking to somebody who they're talking about their experiencing domestic abuse, they will often use the phrase of, I think I'm going mad. They think it's all about them. And actually what we need to do is try and actually normalise that many of these responses are normal responses to abnormal behaviours that they're experiencing, and anybody would experience these if they were in those situations. Okay. I hope I'm doing okay for time, so I forgot to time myself. So, first thing to say is about don't be afraid of opening up this subject, because not having conversation about it increases the fact that it's not something I can share. It's something to be hidden and be ashamed about and embarrassed about. Nobody ever chooses to be in this kind of situation. They didn't choose that person for this abuse to happen. They chose it because they thought they'd chosen a loving, caring partner or son or family. So it's about really kind of not being afraid to go there, because it's important we all have these conversations, then it isn't something that's hidden away and just becomes that other person's business. So if you are something and you're kind of concerned, and the difficulty at the moment is people's behaviours might be different from usual anyway, because of they're juggling different tasks, they're feeling stressed and anxious, they're worried about their job. So unpicking some of this stuff will be quite tricky, and I guess it's something that probably won't necessarily happen in one conversation. It might be something that happens over time. Things you might be the only person that person's ever told about what's going on, so you really need to kind of listen in to the language and the words they're using and kind of get the undercurrents that might be there. So try and have a conversation. If you think there's something not right, I would say kind of trust your sort of felt sense. Ideally in a safe private space. If somebody's working from home, using headphones so the conversation can't be overheard as much as opposed to using speaker on a laptop. Find somewhere where they might be not overheard. We've got clients sitting in a car because that's the only place where they can not be overheard by other family members, or a garden shed. Think about other ways of communicating. It might be telephone, Zoom, whatever. It might not be appropriate, but they might feel okay sharing a few things in a text or an email. Opening up with kind of simple questions. How are you at the moment? How's everything working at home? So it's really important not to jump into this is what's happening, this is what you need to do, because you don't know what the situation is. So it's more kind of gently kind of collecting information, making sure that the other person knows that actually you're kind of concerned about them, and that they kind of, are you okay? Do you feel safe? Is there somebody at home making you feel uncomfortable? Really reassuring the person you've asked that question. They don't need to tell you anything, because they might not want to, because they might feel, and this is a really big thing for a lot of people who experience abuse, they might not trust you. They don't know what you're going to do with that information. They don't know how you're going to respond to it. So you might need to build up that relationship with them before they feel safe to disclose anything. The other really important thing is talking about confidentiality, about who you're going to share anything that person said to you, particularly in the workplace. Who are you telling? Where does this information go? Does it go to the line manager, HR? What are you doing? Or is it just a conversation you and they are having at this moment and you're not doing anything? And also particularly where there's fear about telling about what's happening where there are children at home, because often there's a huge fear around this issue. As soon as somebody mentions this subject, you're reporting it to social services and my children will be taken care. We know that doesn't happen, but that's still very much a fear that people have, even though that isn't the reality. Really, if they do start talking about, acknowledge their courage, because it's really, really difficult to talk about these things and to say to somebody, actually, this is where my relationship is, and it's not what I want it to be. Plus, at the same time, that person will be often quite conflicted, because they don't like how the person is talking to them or behaving towards them or making them do certain things, but there will often be a part of them that loves them, still cares about them, is concerned about them, and kind of sees the other nice behaviours as well. So they're kind of conflicted between the two about how is this relationship, what do I want from it. So it's really important to acknowledge that other part as well. And it's really difficult, particularly in cases where perhaps the abuser is an adult son, where they don't want to throw them out at home, they don't want to report them, they don't want that person to be homeless. So there's a lot of complexity in some of this. Be prepared that somebody might be angry, upset, they might cry, they might be very emotional, or they might shut down completely and just go completely silent. And just, you have to respect where that person is and just kind of leave it. If they want to come back to you, they will. Everybody has to be in the right place to talk about this stuff. You can't decide for them where they are in their sort of journey of acknowledging what they want and where they are about it. Be careful and mindful about the language you use. Thinking about things, ask questions. I think I've done a bit more about what happened, rather than what did you do to cause it, because the thing is about not putting the blame on the person who's being abused. It's the abuser who's doing the actions that are the wrong ones, and making it the responsibility of the other person isn't that helpful, because they will be doing everything they can to avoid those repeat experiences. Really key is don't blame the person for what's happening. Don't judge them. We kind of again, it's all about language. So why did you choose this person? They didn't choose the person. Or tell them what to do. Okay, find the next slide. Oh, if you go back one, yeah. So person might not be saying much, but you might get a sense that something doesn't feel quite right. So if they tell you something about what happened, about, oh, they made me do this, or actually I'm really struggling, ask about how does that person experience it, or how do they feel about it? Because if they feel fine, that's okay. It's when people don't feel comfortable with what's happening, they don't feel they've got any say in the matter, they would like things to be different, but they can't voice those opinions. That's when you have to kind of things. And then following up, has it happened before? It's just a one-off, or how do you manage? Because somebody will have come up with their own ways of managing the situation if it happens frequently. There isn't a solution to any of this. People need to work it out for themselves. So telling somebody what to do can often actually send them scuttling away and shutting the door on talking about it. You kind of need to leave the door open. They need to work out for themselves. They might not even see what's happening as abusive, so they kind of know that's, you know, my relationship, that's just a different tricky patch or whatever it is. They will find ways to so it's really important not to find a solution, because somebody might jump in and seek for help immediately. They might take years before they actually say, this is what's happening and I'm not happy with it and I want it to change. So really important just to listen and acknowledge, to signpost, but only if they want it. Kind of if they say, do you know who could help, rather than kind of these people will help you. It's around kind of putting that person back in control of their own lives, because that control has been taken away from them by the abuser. So it's about listening to their voice and letting them decide and choose how and what they want to do. Recognizing that actually talking about this comes with huge amounts of shame, embarrassment and fears. Nobody wants to talk about this, about what's happening in their own lives. It's highly shameful, and they will feel often quite judged by other people about kind of, you know, all these things about why do people stay, why don't they just this. So it's really important not to kind of feed into that. I think I've said this, don't take over, let them be in control. And if they, you know, there's something going on, discuss ways of communicating that might use code words. So if they feel like, actually, green, I'm in a safe place, I can talk about this stuff now, so you can have a conversation, or red, actually the person's around, it's not safe, then you can do it. So it's a way of like, if you having ways that you can kind of say when safe is space. And also if you feel that there is things going on at home, making them aware of things like police silent calls. So if somebody can't actually call 999, they can call 999 and then press 5 twice, and the police will respond to that even though nobody's spoken. And again, thinking about a trauma-informed response. They have experienced trauma, so it's about what has happened to them rather than what they did. So it makes you think about the kind of questions around what you might be asking and framing them in a certain way about what has happened, what happened the next, what did you feel, rather than what did you do, which caused this other person to do these things, and just fundamentally be supportive. Okay, so the other thing I sort of put in here is, I talked very much about people who experience abuse, but some of you will be working with people who are the abusers. You probably don't know it, but given that the statistics, it's highly possible, because they're in every walk of life. So the things around here is, you know, which you might get a bit more sort of organisational, around what the organisations do around policies and guidelines if they know somebody is actually being a perpetrator of abuse. If somebody self-discloses things like, and it could be things that, you know, actually the police came to the door and arrested me, or that kind of thing, that will happen if they talk about it, which is unlikely, but it might happen. You might get more indirect disclosures where people might talk around a little bit more around things like what they're telling their partner to do, or that might start raising red flags, or kind of, you know, sort of saying, well, I've decided she's doing all the childcare and I don't do any of that. So, but with a sense of, did she have a say in it? So you might be thinking about these, and then thinking about if somebody is seeking, actually acknowledging that they are saying, I am struggling about my behaviours in my relationship, supporting them to get help, which will be things through an organisation that respect, that has specific programmes nationwide for people who want to say, yes, I'm sorry. But the key thing about all of that is that person has to be willing to admit that their behaviours are not as they should be and want to change them. If it's somebody else saying you need to do it, it's not going to work. Okay, next slide. And one of the key things I want to add in here is really important when you're working with people who've experienced trauma. They will disclose very often. Sometimes people do what I call a floodgate if they're talking about the first time, and they will tell you stuff, and some of it will be pretty horrific if they do tell you things that will kind of shock you. And some things might shock you as well if they have tried to get help, and how statutory services and things work that you might not have been aware of. And it's about then thinking about what are you left with, how do you respond to it, how can you support yourself, and what does your organisation offer you. And the next slide, just flagging up, or if it follows kind of how things have worked in other pandemics, we're all anticipating once that we unlock at least 20% increase in demand for services. People who will be sitting on things that they haven't been able to share. The actual holding some of this in this current situation is going to have a bigger impact on people's mental health issues, and they will be kind of enduring if they don't get the right kind of support. I've also included, I think, some other more comprehensive PowerPoint idea, that kind of signposting to sort of key organisations, which I'm sure they'll share, and a little, so kind of specialist organisations for BME groups or LBGT groups, and the national helplines as well, which I'm sure will be shared after this. That's kind of a very brief summary.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Fiona. And again, as I was saying to Kirsty, and he's often the way, you start a conversation here, and then we could run a webinar on this for an afternoon days, I'm sure. Yeah. And actually, that's testament to the amount of questions that are coming in, and comments, and people feeding in. And I wish we had more time, and maybe that's something that we can look at into the future. But just there's been a number of themes that's been a crossover for people that are mental health ambassadors in their workplace, or champions, or workplace mental health first aiders as well, about so many of the themes that yourself and Kirsty have picked up on, particularly around language, particularly around the stigma, the fear, the shame that sits in this as well. One of the key themes that I think has been coming back up is around safeguarding as well, and the confidentiality, and actually where do we sit within that. And I just wanted to, and I'm sure you're in the same place, in fact I know you are, because we've had a conversation prior to this webinar, but the role of these individuals in their workplaces that are joining us today is very much around a supportive colleague, noticing a change in someone, having the confidence to instigate that conversation and hold that space, listen, and then really signpost people on to the right resources, whether they're your services in terms of the Women's Trust, or Kirsty's services in terms of Cruse bereavement, or whatever it may be in a specific way, or all of those internal ones. I know Kirsty touched on employee assistance programs as well, and HR. And I just didn't want anyone to get caught up in the thoughts around how do they hold safeguarding or make decisions around safeguarding confidentiality. But in your experience, Fiona, I just want to ask you, what do you think is a good way to approach confidentiality within the workplace by being a supportive colleague? Because clearly someone might say, I do want to talk to you, I trust you, but I don't want you to say anything. And clearly we don't know where the conversation's going to go.
I think, the best way to start is about kind of, just flagging up somebody. If you tell me something that makes you think that you might be at harm or others might be at harm, then I might have to do something with that information. But I can't tell you exactly what it is right now until I know. Right. But just to make the person aware that if they tell me certain things, and we normally use words that harm to yourself or others, then we might have to kind of not hold that confidentiality, but be clear and transparent to that person about, if they start talking about things, saying, okay, now we're reaching an area that I've got some concerns about, I might need to check out. Be really open and transparent about what you're doing with that information and who you're sharing with it, and what actions you might take, so the person isn't left in any doubt. And often what we try to do, if we've got some safeguarding concerns, might encourage the person to check it out for themselves, to use the NSPCC helpline, which can give guidance if people have got some concerns, or if they kind of, or sometimes the clients will, report themselves to social services if they've got concerns. Even as a therapist, we don't jump in and do disclosures to third parties without a lot of consideration. And I think it's really important about that. There's no kind of, it's really about risk. That's the important bit.
And they would be a professional decisions that individuals were taking, weren't they? So actually, what we need to do is make sure that the professionals within our organisation, whether that's HR, managers or EAPs or whatever they may be can step in and support, rather than us as individuals, as
I would say no, I mean, in our service, our counsellors don't make the decisions themselves. It's a group discussion, myself and the senior staff members. So
and I think as well, for me, what that highlights, and it's a good reminder for myself as well, is that actually this is a great opportunity to then, we've raised our awareness to maybe our organisations don't have these policies and procedures in place. So actually this is a great opportunity to take this back, isn't it? And not see that as a negative, but actually see it as an opportunity that we can have these conversations with HR or whoever it might be in our businesses, to then be able to build in clearer communiques around what confidentiality means and our roles as mental health first aiders.
And just to say, in the kind of thing, the resource I've sent, there's links to the employers initiative against domestic abuse that provides some networking events and policies and guidelines for employers, and there's also business in the community who provide some sort of, I think they've got a sort of a resource that people can download and look at as well.
Great, thank you, brilliant. And just one last point, I'd not heard that before. 999, and then you press 55. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's what they call silent calls to the police. So
brilliant, fantastic. Thank you very much. And again, we'll be sharing information about the Women's Trust, but you can certainly connect with Fiona after this, as I'm sure many people will do. Thank you very much, Fiona, for your time as well. Okay, so we are moving on to, there's the Women's Trust contact details as well at this moment. So we're going to be moving on to, I'm just going to run a very quick session with you around a reminder of some of the key parts around being a mental health first aider, being a workplace ambassador, being a workplace mental health champion as well, and just taking some of those key points and just putting them into the context of what we've discussed so far, in terms of having good supportive conversations, really. So we're going to touch very briefly on algae, a reminder of that for anyone who's been on the mental health first aid role course. Our current role in the situation, and who we are and what we can expect of ourselves and what our colleagues can expect of us as well as workplace champions and ambassadors. How we're going to have that conversation remotely, and obviously coming back to, as both Fiona and Kirsty have talked about, looking after ourselves, and the internal resources and support pathways, some of which we've touched on as well. So this isn't an opportunity to bring yourself off mute. 129 of you all talking at the same time would be quite a cacophony, but just a question to bear to yourself and some reflections. Just what are those current situations that you're noticing that colleagues are experiencing at the moment? What is coming up? What are those themes? In fact, if you'd like to share any, please do put them on the chat. It'd be interesting to see if there are some common themes that are running through. I'm sure there are. We know at the moment, some of you may have seen the recent 2,000 people survey, UK workforce of Mental Health Foundation and LinkedIn. From that came out some themes around longer working hours, higher stress levels, the blurring of boundaries and not sure when to switch off and when to re-engage with work, and this pressure to be constantly available as well. So do drop in what you are either experiencing yourself or what you are hearing your colleagues come to you, or when you are noticing change, you are picking up and having those conversations with them as well. For those of you that have been on the MHFA course, and just a reminder of that algae, of those of you that haven't and have been on other workplace champion and ambassador courses, same framework, it would just be approached in a different way. But that idea of actually noticing change, and that's really what we're looking for, getting to know ourselves, getting to know our colleagues as well. And by doing that, we can normalise the conversation in our workplaces around mental health. Listening, which is time and time again has come up when we have these discussions, but very much has come up today with the insights that Fiona and Kirsty have both shared with us. And actually, I think this opportunity to really just listen and understand someone is such a real gift, essentially, that we can offer somebody else as well, and something we can all do. We don't need these very particular professional experiences and specialisms that both Fiona and Kirsty and their colleagues have as well. That support and information, so just reassuring people and passing on that support and information about those internal supports as well, which moves us into those appropriate professional support signposting. All your organisations have fantastic portfolio of support opportunities available, and they'll all be there on your wellbeing and your intranet pages as well, or by going into your employee relations or your HR places. I'm sure in the roles that you do, you know those. Here is a reminder to actually access them for yourselves as well and use them to look after yourselves. So quite often people are very good at signposting to, say, employee assistance programs, but maybe not so much in thinking of using those to look after themselves as well. And we've seen lots of themes that have come through the work the City Mental Health Alliance has been doing, particularly since the lockdown has been happening, with leaders and people across a whole cross spectrum of organisations and businesses within the different sectors, have found that these themes are coming out. So accepting what we can't do and support others to do the same as well. There's so much going on at the moment in terms of change that actually a real reminder of some of these key basics can be so helpful to us as well. As it says there, working with yourself and your team and decide what that new norm is. And Kirsty touched earlier, we keep hearing this phrase, this new norm, but what are they for you? And they may well change over time as well. So actually the just conversations you had in week 1, week 2 may well be different now as well, and they can change as they go along. It might be that a visual connection like this is quite useful. There has been quite a lot of stories of people saying, you know, I'm really interested in what you've got to say, Jaan, I'd like to have a conversation, and then seen looking at their phones or having a conversation with somebody else off screen. So just remember, if we're going to use this visual connection with each other, then please make sure we use the same ideas and principles around good body language as well. Or maybe actually messaging, people have said, has found far more informal and a much easier way to kind of connect spontaneously as well. That key theme as well, that if we're unsure about something, if that radar goes off as that sixth sense, as Fiona said earlier, then making sure we're doing something about it sooner rather than later as well. So engaging and starting that conversation with someone. And then keeping everyone involved in meetings and in events like this. It's quite easy to maybe slip under the radar when there's so much going on, when we're working in such busy environments, both at home and within our workplaces. So just making sure we are keeping an eye on our colleagues as well, and seeing if we can spot any of those changing signs and behaviours. Have a think about what's been a meaningful conversation for you, whether that's one that you've instigated or whether someone's approached you. What have been the core principles of that? What we find is coming up again and again that people are finding supportive is reminding ourselves that we all have different environments. Our two sessions today have already touched on that to some extent, but actually we may well be living with 3 generations of family, we may be in a shared environment, we may well not be able to have a private, quiet space to work from. Someone said recently that actually none of us are working from home, we're all actually at home because of a crisis situation, trying to be parents, partners, and also to work as well. And I think being able to understand that with each other and work on the individual level rather than just one role fits all is a really good way and a healthy way to approach this. If we are going to instigate conversations with people, just making sure we do have the time to do that. And as we've talked about before, if we can't do it, then that's not a failure. Making sure that we are signposting it to somebody else so they can pick up that conversation. And being probably more proactive at the start. We're getting lots of feedback that people are finding over Zoom calls or messaging or whatever it may be, that actually they have to be a lot clearer about what they've noticed. So being able to say to someone, I've noticed that you're logging in at strange times. I've noticed that you're much quieter. I've noticed that actually deadlines are slipping, whatever it may be, and putting the work aside for one moment. I'm just keen to know, how are you? What's going on for you? That's not like you. How are you? And coming back to that simple question of how are you, and I'm here to connect, is a really good place to start from. Quick reminder of the stress signature model, which I'm sure you all know, and that idea that we need to keep looking after ourselves, keep turning our tap, keep doing those positive tap turns to make sure that we're reducing our stress from the small things that that Lubda was talking to us earlier around about stretching and posture and breathing, to some of the things that Claire's going to do with us in a few moments in terms of just finding moments of calm and peace and allowing opportunities for reflection and clarity, as well as all the good things that we know, having conversations with people we trust, going for walks if we're able to, getting outside for some fresh air if we can, making sure that we've got clear boundaries in terms of delineating between the different roles in our lives at the moment, journaling, engaging, and everything that you would have done before to look after yourself. It's really important that we do so now as well. And just a very quick reminder to set ourselves some commitments as well. So this shouldn't be something that feels like it's another task on your to-do list, I hope, but something that will be enabling you to look after your own mental health and well-being, and something that you can take back as a workplace ambassador, champion, or mental health first aider to enable you to continue to support and develop the conversation within your own environment. Let's just have a quick look here on the chat. There's loads going out, so which is great. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts as well. Lots there about actually being parents and also juggling these different roles, caring responsibilities as well, our own physical, mental health concerns, as well as those of our loved ones and those in our environment as well. Continued anxiety and growing anxiety about the current situation and how this is going to impact us health and community and financially as well. And sometimes as well, we don't always want to have this intense video conversation as well. So just finding that's increasing stress levels as well, and maybe finding alternative ways to engage with our colleagues that are more helpful. So we wanted to share with you those kind of quick reminders around algae, our current role in that situation and how we can do that. A reminder that as Fiona and as Kirsty has said to us today, that listening is really important, that creating a safe space is really important, that using our core key skills that we already know about noticing and then instigating a conversation, having the confidence to start that conversation and just being human about it, remembering that we're not mental health professionals, we're not counsellors, we're not social workers or any of those roles. Actually, our role is just to notice change in our colleagues and then engage with them as confidently as we can and really hold the space for them, and then be able to signpost them to the professional services that we have both internally, and we've heard from 2 great organisations today, and there are also many more. We've got 12 minutes to go, which is good timing all round. Well done, team. So I would like to bring Claire Black in with us. Claire is going to be running a mindfulness session with us and giving us the opportunity to just find some calm, and also the opportunity, I imagine, for our brains to probably just process some of the information before we go into the next piece. So Claire, over to you for the next 10 minutes, please. Thank you, Jan.
So it's time to slow the stream of thoughts. We've had a lot of thoughts over the last hour and 20 minutes. We want to try and reach a state of stillness and have greater clarity. So just take a moment to settle the body with your eyes open with a gentle eye gaze. Start to take deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. So the breaths are deeper and slower than your natural breathing rhythm. And then when you feel ready, when you next breathe out, gently close your eyes. As you breathe in, feel the lungs expand and fill. And as you breathe out, notice how the muscles soften with every exhalation. And now just allow your breath to return to a natural rhythm. And you will be breathing in and out through your nose. So there's no need to try and make it slower or deeper. Just allow your body to breathe. Just notice the weight of the body. Feel the contact that your body has with the chair. And maybe there's a sensation of your feet resting on the floor. A feeling of the hands and the arms simply resting. And at the same time, noticing the space around you, sounds near and far. And then bring your attention inward. What's the weather pattern in your mind? Clear, stormy, or maybe a little bit foggy? Just being aware of any thoughts, notice any feelings that are present right now, and sensations in the body. There's no need to change anything, just allowing it all just to be. And as we check in with the body, try to get a general sense of a feeling. Does your body feel heavy, Was there a feeling of lightness? Are you feeling very restless? Or is there stillness? And if you don't notice anything in particular, that's okay. There's no need to create a feeling. And now let's take a few minutes to scan down through the body from head to toe and starting to become more aware of areas of our body which hold tension and the areas of our body which feel more relaxed. We're not trying to change anything, simply building up a picture of how our body feels right now in this moment. Now, as we start to scan through the body, your mind may decide to wander. Just come back to those physical sensations as you scan down towards the toes. You may notice yourself focusing in on areas that have some discomfort. Try to give equal attention to all areas, as parts of your body will feel comfortable. Just building up a picture of how we feel right now in this moment. And scanning down towards the toes. You may be becoming more aware of any underlying moods, maybe strong emotions, or maybe something more physical. Maybe you feel tired, or maybe on an emotional level, you're feeling very calm. Again, there's no need to create the feeling, just notice. As we flow down towards the toes, let's start to become more aware of the rhythm and the feeling of the breath. So once you've scanned through your body, turn the focus back towards your breath. This is a natural rhythm, breathing in and out through your nose naturally. Now, where do you feel your breath? In your chest? In your stomach? Maybe in your nose? Find the place in your body where it's easiest to find and to bring your complete focus. As we breathe in the sensations of the in-breath and breathing out for the entirety of the out-breath. Resting your awareness on the breath. You may have noticed the rise and fall sensation, the movement of breath in your body. As you breathe in, your body will rise, and as you breathe out, your body will fall. A hand on your stomach is the easiest way to feel the breath. Let's silently count as we breathe in, 1, and as we breathe out, 2, counting up to 10. Just helping us to focus on the breath. And remembering that if our mind wanders off, it's perfectly normal. Just come back to where you left off. Continuing to breathe naturally. And just giving yourself space. Now just continue to focus on your breath without the counting. And then just for a moment, let go of any focus, just for 10 seconds. Let your mind do whatever it wants to do. There's no control. There's no effort. And then gently bring the attention back to the body, the physical sensations, the contact your body has with the chair, and start to notice the sounds around you. And then in your own time, when you are ready, open your eyes. And as we bring this practice to a close, thank you for taking this time and energy to care for yourself in this way. And have a great day. Thank you for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Claire. Really appreciate that. I've just realised that I didn't put myself on mute, so I hope I wasn't snoring away or breathing too deeply there. It's a great reminder that the session you've just run with us as a mindfulness session, a session that Llewellyn ran with us at the beginning as an energizer session, of the simple things we can do to look after ourselves. And yes, they can't change the wider situation, but they can make a real positive impact on our day and our environment at the moment. So thank you very much for leading us through that. It's just left for me to just summarise really the last 90 minutes that we've spent together, and it's been an enormous amount of information, as Claire was just saying, that we've absorbed and that we've shared with each other as well. And thank you all very much for those of you that have shared on the chat and shared your time as being part of this. I think the key themes that are coming up for me is around listening, the power of listening, what we can do in terms of supporting our colleagues, whether they are experiencing domestic abuse, whether they're experiencing bereavement, grief and loss, through death and dying, or whether it is our stress containers are starting to fill up and feeling overwhelmed by the current situation and what is going on. And as a key skill, that's something that I know you've all got, something I feel very confident that you've all got. But I do also want to encourage you and remind you that you need to be listening to yourselves as well. You need to be looking after yourselves. That saying about putting our own oxygen masks on before we reach out to others as well. Not only does that model good behaviour to those around us, our family and friends, but also to our colleagues, but it also reinforces those really good habits in ourselves. And I think now more than ever, those of us who have chosen to become mental health first aiders or mental health workplace champions or ambassadors, or those of us that are just good at having conversations and spotting those signs and symptoms in our colleagues and reaching out and connecting with them and building those relationships, maybe feeling a sense of pressure, even more so to support those around us and to do even more. And I do want to remind us to look after ourselves. I do want to remind us that there are some fantastic organisations out there, Women's Trust around domestic abuse, Cruse bereavement around bereavement, loss, death and dying, and so many others as well. So please do make sure that we're accessing and using those and signposting people onto those resources, as well as all those great resources that our organisations provide to us around HR, employee relations and employee assistance programs, as well as many other benefits as well. I'd like to say thank you as well to Kate. Kate Laird has been in the background and making sure that 160 of us have been well looked after in terms of our tech needs as well. There she is in front of a mountain. So not only can she do all that, she can do that from a mountainside as well. I'd just like to say again, thank you to Kirsty as well from Cruse Bereavement, to Fiona, who's still with us from the Women's Trust, to Lubna, Ariel from Slaughter and Way for our energizer this morning, to Claire for our Claire Davison White from our mindfulness session just there as well. And as Alison mentioned right at the beginning as well, thank you again to Slaughter and May and Goldman Sachs, two organisations that have played a significant role in enabling today to happen, and Gabriella Wicks and Manali Dave as well, two individuals that have really played a part in that. So thank you all for that. Myself, Kate and Fiona will just stay on for the next couple of minutes. If anyone would like to drop us a private message or anything on the chat, then please do. City Mental Health Alliance will be sharing information and resources after this, and also there will be an evaluation to give us an insight into this session today, but also future sessions and what you're looking for. Kate, I believe that a link will be going up on the chat. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've already shared it, but I will reshare it now to everyone.
Brilliant. So if you can take a few moments to share your insights with us, that would be really helpful as well. And to use Claire's language as well. So whatever your internal personal weather patterns are, I wish you some moments of calm. Please do go off and continue to remember to turn those taps and look after yourselves, and have a fantastic rest of the afternoon. Thank you all very much.